Hi everyone. Today we are in Mark chapter 8, and I'd like you to raise your hand if you have ever been without food for 3 days or more, whether you were fasting and praying or whether there was no food available at the time. Okay, now I want you to think about the symptoms that your body experienced when you went without food for at least 3 days. Think about those symptoms because Jesus is traveling a lot during these days, and we're going to be looking at our map. So if you don't have yours out yet, go ahead and get that ready. But massive crowds are gathering to enjoy Jesus. All right, they want to hear him, they know what he's speaking is the truth, and they want to follow him, and that's what they're doing. And in verse 2, it tells us that they have been together for 3 days and the people have not eaten anything. Does this sound familiar? Jesus does not want to send them away hungry because he knows that if you're experiencing a lack of food, then there's a good possibility that you could faint or, be ill or whatever along the way if you're trying to get home or to the next town. And so the disciples pick up on this. They understand from the last time where Jesus is going with this, and they want to help, all right? But unfortunately, they come up with the same answer they did the last time. Where are we going to find enough food to feed all these people? And what's the answer, class? God is going to bless and multiply whatever we give him. That is always the answer. So can we ask the same of Jesus, of the Lord? Absolutely, we can. Whether it's food, finances, clothes, whatever it is that you have a need for, not a want, but this is a need. Yes, of course he wants to help you. He is your heavenly Father and he's a good daddy. So let's look at verse 5 to find out what Jesus asked the disciples next. He says, "How much bread do you have?" This is the same thing that he said of the feeding of the 5,000. Now, what was the answer this time? This time it's 7 loaves. And then what does Jesus tell the disciples to do? Have the crowd sit down. And why do we do that? Because it's a calming atmosphere. The people are expecting something. And in this case, they're expecting to be fed. Verse 6 in the New Living Translation says, "Then he took the 7 loaves, thanked God for them, and broke them into pieces. He gave them, the pieces, to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd." So deja vu all over again. Now, I just have a Kleenex here, but I'm going to pretend that this is a piece of bread, and this is what Jesus is doing. He's tearing off a piece of bread and handing this one to a disciple. He's just tearing off another, handing that to a disciple, another, and so forth until he tears it all up, hands it to the disciples, and each disciple is taking their piece to the people and tearing it up, and it's multiplying in their hands. They're not running back and forth to Jesus going, "I need a few more pieces." They are doing it themselves, tearing it, multiplying it, giving it out, all right? So that's the word picture. But wait, there's more. There's also a few small, somebody said it, fish. That's right. So they have a few small fish, and they're doing that in the same manner until everybody has eaten, they're fed, they are satisfied, and in the Aramaic it says, Jesus ended their fast. Isn't that a beautiful word picture? I love the Aramaic. Okay, so then the disciples go ahead and gather up all the pieces, and they have large baskets to do that. And how many baskets are full this time? 7. 7 loaves, 7 baskets. And the word for large basket in this picture is the same word that is used when Paul was lowered down the side wall in Damascus so that he could escape alive. So these baskets are large enough to hold a body in, a man's body. So these are large baskets, or hampers, you might even call them. And you can find that story in Acts 9, chapter 9 and verse 25. So back to Mark 8 and verse 9, it tells us that the number of people in the crowd was about 4,000. Now, if you look in Matthew's gospel and you go to chapter 15 and verse 38, it says the 4,000 was actually the count of men, not including women and children. All right. So an interesting note here that all four gospels include the account of the feeding of the 5,000, but only Matthew and John Mark give us an account of the feeding of the 4,000, which is what we're studying right now. And it's believed that the 5,000 was mostly a Jewish community who showed up, whereas the 4,000 is mostly a Gentile community that is showing up. And perhaps that's why it's not included in all four Gospels. All right, let's look at verse 10 in our map. So Jesus gets into the boat and he sails to a vicinity called Dalmanutha, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. And Dalmanutha may also be Magdala or Magdala, depending on your pronunciation, which is on the western shore of Lake Galilee. And so I have my map here, and Lake Galilee, or the Sea of Galilee, is here. And we're talking about this area right here. It's on the western shore of the lake. And you can find that also in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15 and verse 39. Now, the Aramaic word for Dalmanutha means land of oppression. And who do you think is waiting on the shore to greet Jesus? Well, if you guessed the Pharisees, you would be right. Talk about oppression. Let's look at verse 11 in the Amplified Version. The Pharisees came out and began to argue contentiously and debate with him, demanding a sign from him, a sign from heaven, to test him because of their unbelief. He groaned and sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation, tribe, or nation demand a sign? I assure you and most solemnly say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." Now that phrase, no sign will be given to this generation, is really an emphatic statement that Jesus is making. He's actually saying, I forbid it. All right. Now, what is the problem with wanting proof of, this man was sent from God, and you want proof with a sign, a miracle, or a wonder? Well, the problem with that is that the devil can also do this. Do you remember back in Moses' time when Moses went to go see Pharaoh and God said, throw down your stick and it will become a snake? Well, what did their magicians do? Same thing. All right. And then we have the occult today. We have fortune tellers today. We have astrologers today. Do you read a horoscope? That's of the demonic. All right. So don't get involved there. If you want to see what the future is going to be, go ahead and turn to the book of Revelation. And we're really going to have to pay attention to what is godly and what is not. All right. Did you know you also have the power to make an emphatic statement as well? If you get a bad report, don't receive it. You say, I forbid it. Why? Because you have the power to cast that thing out and away from you so that you don't receive the bad news. All right. Now, we don't know how many hours have passed since the feeding of the 4,000, but we do know that the disciples have food on their mind, because once Jesus leaves the Pharisees, he gets back into the boat and they start crossing over the other side. Jesus is teaching them about the leaven or the yeast, depending on your translation, of the religious people and of the people who are politically ambitious. And in verse 15, it says, this is the Passion Translation, "And as they were sailing across the lake, Jesus repeatedly warned them, be on your guard against the yeast inside the Pharisees and the yeast inside of Herod." Now, the disciples really don't have a clue about what he's talking about, the yeast inside of them. However, they're hungry and they don't have any bread in the boat. And so they're thinking food. And, does Jesus read our thoughts? Yes, he does. And so what makes yeast or leaven, how does that affect bread? Well, it makes it rise. Okay, so it changes the consistency. And that's what Jesus is getting at, is that it changes you. And so in verses 17 and 18, Jesus kind of pulls up his disciples short and he says, "Why all this fussing over forgetting to bring bread? Do you still not see or understand what I say to you? Are your hearts still hard? You have good eyes, yet you don't see. You have good ears, yet you still don't hear. Neither do you remember." Well, what is it that they're not seeing? What is it that they're not hearing? What is it that they're not remembering? The miracles, signs, and wonders that are legitimate through the Lord Jesus Christ. All right. And so they don't have to worry about food or anything else. Let's review. There was a feeding of the 5,000. And how many baskets were left over? 12. There was the feeding of the 4,000 plus. And how many baskets were left over? 7. All right. How come we still don't get it? The impossible is possible with God. Now, all we have to do is change our thinking, adjust our thinking, and also adjust the way we pray. All right. Now, get out your map again, and we're going to locate Bethsaida, which I believe is on the map here. Yes, it is northeast, in the northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee here. All right, so that's where we're going to next. And in verses 22 and 23 in the New King James Version, it says, "Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him." Now, this is so appropriate because Jesus has just told them, you have good eyes, but you cannot see. Let's see if they're going to see this time. So they bring this blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led them out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, he put his hands on him and he asked him if he saw anything. Now, first of all, why does Jesus take the man out of town? Well, remember, there's always a crowd surrounding Jesus. And so there's a good possibility that this crowd will have an influence over this miracle. All right. And then remember what the saliva of the firstborn is said to do in Jesus's day. It's said to have some healing powers to it. All right. Let's look at verse 24 in New King James. "And he, the blind man, looked up and said, I see men like trees walking." Well, what does that mean to you? I used to teach visually impaired. And so that means to me that this man could see at one time because he knows what a tree looks like. Then verses 25 and 26. "Then he," Jesus, "put his hands on his eyes," the man's, "again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, Neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town." Now, when you are healing people, please do not be dismayed if it doesn't, quote, work the first time. Demons are stubborn and they don't want to give up the body that they're in. And you may be dealing with a demon, which was a lot of Jesus's healing ministry, was casting out demons so that people could get free and healthy. Now, the second reason is, why does he instruct him not to go back to the town and the townspeople? Same reason we talked about before, because of their unbelief and their influence in this man's life. All right, now there's a variety of different translations out there, and I just want to point out that this word see or eyes in verse 23 is not the common word that we would normally use, but rather it means both things: to see with physical eyes and also to see with spiritual eyes. And you can find that also in Matthew chapter 20 and verse 34. All right, now I want you to locate Caesarea Philippi, and if you follow the Bible much, you've heard that word before, and it is way up here, about 30 miles north. Here we are in Bethsaida, and we're going up to Caesarea Philippi. And so it's about a 2-day journey, or 30 miles north of Bethsaida, and they're walking there. And we're going to go to a beautiful place called Tel Dan, and it's located at the foothills of Mount Hermon. Again, I'll show you where that is. We're going to this area here. You can kind of see the mountains on the map there. It's at the foothills of Mount Hermon, and it was an ancient Roman city that was rebuilt by Philip the Tetrarch in honor of Augustus Caesar. What is a tetrarch? Well, that is a governor. What they would do is they would have a piece of land and they would divide it into 4 pieces, and then each section would have a governor over that section. So there would be 4 governors, and Philip was just one. So they're walking, and as they're walking to this place, remember they're walking 30 miles or 2 days' journey, Jesus asked his disciples a question, and he says, "Who is it that the people say I am?" And their reply, John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet. And then he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter pipes up and he says, "You're the Messiah, you're the Son of God." Did Jesus disagree? No, he did not. This is the first time that Jesus really reveals his identity. Up to this point, only the demons recognized him as the Son of God. Jesus keeps referring to himself as the Son of Man. So this is a turning point in Jesus's ministry, and he begins to let his disciples know that the Son of Man must go to Jerusalem and suffer some terrible things by the elders, the priests, and the scholars. And he explains that he will be killed, and on the 3rd day he will rise again from the dead to life. And this is when Peter pulls him aside and rebukes him. And what does Jesus say? He says, "Get behind me, Satan." Why does he say that? I mean, that's an awful thing to say to somebody. Well, it's because Peter is thinking selfishly instead of thinking of God's plan. And Peter doesn't know that, but Jesus does. Now, I want you to close your eyes as I read this closing statement by Jesus, because this is what it means to be a follower of Christ. And I'm going to be reading verses 34 through 38. Close your eyes. Jesus had his disciples and the crowd gather around him. And he said to them, "If you truly want to follow me, you should at once completely disown your own life. And you must be willing to share my cross and experience it as your own, as you continually surrender to my ways. For if you let your life go for my sake and for the sake of the gospel, you will continually experience true life. But if you choose to keep your life for yourself, you will forfeit what you tried to keep. For what use is it to gain all the wealth and power of this world with everything it could offer you at the cost of your own life? And what could be more valuable to you than your own soul? If you are ashamed of me and my words while living among sinful and faithless people, then I, the Son of Man, will also be ashamed of you when I make my appearance with my holy messengers in the glorious splendor of my Father." Sobering thoughts indeed. And I hope to see you on the next lesson when we study Mark chapter 9. Goodbye for now.